Hey everyone, I'm very excited to be speaking at DigitalOcean Deploy today. I'll be talking to you about something that's really close to my heart, that is setting sail in a sea of CMSs. I am Daniel Madelis Opiri, and you can catch me anywhere online as Malgamves, Malgamves. I do developer relations at a really cool open source company called Strappy, and I mix beats and curate music on Mixcloud. So if that's your thing, do check that out. Great. Okay, let's get definitions out of the way. In my talk, when I mentioned CMS, I'm talking about content management systems. When I talk about content models, I mean a collection of related fields, fields being things like text, Boolean, or rich text. When I mention DX, I'm talking about developer experience. So yeah, this is just for some context as I'm going through this talk so that you're not lost. And another thing I want to get out of the way is all the nautical references I'll be making. So I'll be talking about ships and crew and oceans and sails. I think that makes sense at a DigitalOcean talk. So let's just go with it because ships and oceans are interesting. Great. Okay, so we've got that out of the way. Let's go through our overview for today. Our overview. So we'll start with planning your voyage, and then we'll go into getting a crew on board, and then being resourceful at sea. All very vague and all on purpose because I am trying to get your attention and hopefully keep it. So let's get started. Planning your voyage. I like to see planning your voyage into the sea of CMS as a sort of preparing your ship. You can run all your tests and you can make sure everything's working, all the holes are plugged, but you never know what happens until you set out on the water, right? I like to make this analogy of preparing your ship to the way we build software. You can do all you need to do to build your software and make sure it works, but you never really know how it fares until you put it out in the world. And that's when you start to think about things like how to maintain it and how to make it scale. Which makes me think and say building software is only preparation for your journey. And then software goes way beyond just how it's built. And like I touched on before, only when we set sail do we start to think about things like maintainability and scalability. And we start to ask some interesting questions. How do we maintain and scale our software? Because systems are built to achieve a specific thing. And if the system does not achieve the purpose it was built for, then it's as good as not having that system. Really unreliable and inaccessible software is just as good as no software at all. And we need to think about these things way before we set sail, or way before we deploy our applications. We need to think about maintainability and scalability. And we sort of do that. Well, at least the good software engineers do that. It's good practice. It isn't something everyone does, but it's good practice. And I have this quote which says, a sturdy launchpad makes for a better liftoff. And really what I want to do with this is point out how we build our software and how we've made it a best practice to build and ship and deploy our software with things like scalability and maintainability in mind. We do this for things like ships. We do this for things like rockets. And of course, like I mentioned, we do this for software. But I think the concept of having the forethought to think about maintainability and scalability can go way beyond just software. And I feel it can be extended to something like content. You might be asking why, and I'm about to tell you. So content today, more than ever, I believe, extends into every part of our lives. And you've probably heard a version of this quote, content is queen or content is king, because content really is everywhere. And today, more than ever, content is at the center of your modern business. It's in our Twitter feed, our newsletters, our case studies, our website pages, our billboards, our menus, our job boards. It's literally everywhere. But the problem here is we have each of these channels in their own silos. So we have content for our Twitter, we have content for our website, we have content for our job boards in their own dedicated spaces. And this really makes it super hard to scale when everything is in its own silo. And I want to introduce what a lot of people today are calling the API first approach, which is powered by headless CMSs. And these really make scaling your content much easier because then you can think about maintainability and scalability way before you ship or deploy. All right, I mentioned something that many people might not know about, headless CMS. What is a headless CMS? A headless CMS, or the concept of being headless, really just means that you deliver your content to any front end via an API. So any device that can make a call to any device that can make an HTTP call, rather, can access data from your CMS. So we can put content on devices, on mobile devices, on wearable devices, things like smartwatches, and servers, on web pages and websites, web applications, and IoT devices. As long as, like I mentioned, as long as your device can make an HTTP call, it can get data from a headless CMS. Which leads me to my first tip. In setting sail in the sea of CMSs, you want to make sure that you go headless, because then you're sort of preparing yourself for problems that you face in the future. We're sort of banking on those best practices that we mentioned and creating a sturdy launchpad for us to lift off, because you will need to scale. Most people just don't do it. So great, we've gone headless, we've set sail. What do we do next? Getting a crew on board. Getting your crew on board is really about creating workflows. Creating workflows to make your team as successful as they can be by giving them the tools they need. And how this happens is just by making sure that every team is covered. You don't leave any team for dead. You've got your ship, that's great, but your crew handles your ship. So they're in charge of how things go and how well your journey will be. So making sure that they're well equipped to handle anything that comes at them is a really big step in your journey towards scaling and maintaining your content. I'll give you a sample workflow of how things usually work in most teams. So we have a couple of parties, and in most organizations, we have a developer team, of course. These are the ones who build out your applications. They're in charge of building and integrating your CMS with whatever front end you need to integrate that with. And of course, we have your content team. These are the people who add, edit, and use your CMS the most, usually the most. And all that mixes together and you deliver content to your end users. Great. So now that you have an idea of a usual workflow and the teams involved in making sure content can scale, let's talk about how we can optimize for your content team. In optimizing, we want to make sure that we have a few items at our team's disposal just so we can make sure that they are as successful as possible. I'll go through these. These are more features of a CMS. And the first one is a robust user interface. Your CMS needs this because your content team shouldn't have any trouble really going through your CMS. The next is access control. Your content team or your organization as a whole should be able to limit who has access to what content. And this is a really good feature because it goes a really long way in making sure the right people are making changes to the right things. And besides that, if you want your content to be as rich and to embrace the creative beings you are, you need a wealth of fields. You don't just want a text field, a number field, and maybe a date field. They're really important fields, but quite limiting. The ability to use things like rich text and deliver markdown and pictures and videos and a lot of rich media fields is a really good feature of any CMS, and your CMS should be able to do these things for your team. And you should be able to have reusable content models. Creating content can be very draining, and having to do the same thing over and over and over and over again isn't something anyone wants to do. So having the ability to create a content model once and then have that apply to different types of content is a really good thing for your content team. And they'll be very happy with it. And last but definitely not least is a great user experience. UX matters, because if your content team can't find what they're looking for or have to struggle through your application, then that is a really terrible experience and will be a big bottleneck in making sure that your content scales, because then it's limiting the ability for you to create that content. So UX is big. And these are really a few things that you need to keep in mind when thinking about your content team and your CMS. Great. Let's talk about optimizing for your developer team. Just as important, because these are the people who get your application out, who handle or integrate with your CMS. So for our application team, we definitely want a robust developer experience. Things shouldn't break down, and things should be reliable enough for your developers to feel successful and feel really great with using your CMS. You also want API flexibility. So the ability to do really nice things in the back end and tweak how your CMS works is a really interesting features that today developers are really enjoying. And this is something that we have at Strapi, and we see people doing the most bizarre things. But these bizarre things bring about some of the best business value and extend your content in such amazing ways. And API flexibility is super important. And one thing that's really undermined or overlooked is resources. You should have a wealth of resources, because if people aren't able to look up issues or look at how to do certain things, then really they will not be as successful as they can be. How do they scale the CMS if it is self-hosted? How do they extend its use? Things like that. And all these resources should be available, and I think should be considered when picking out your CMS. We also need a wealth of integrations. Contrary to what you think, even though headless CMSs can deliver to any front end via an HTTP request, it doesn't mean that that experience will be great. So if you have a CMS that thinks about your different front ends and creates integrations to make sure that you have the best possible experience with connecting their API to whatever front end or whatever programming language that you might want to use, that is always a good thing to have. So the more integration, the better, because that means they've taken the time to actually explain how you can do something like this. And that's always nice to have for developers. And why are we trying to optimize for our teams? I think it's super important to do this because a successful team is a successful business. And optimizing for teams means going a step further into extending your scalability efforts. So really, in thinking and optimizing for each team, you're really doing so much and going a long way in enabling your own scalability and making for easier scalability as a company. So great. How do we scale content? How does that work? How does this go? Let me just summarize that in a few very brief points. Scaling content goes two ways. For developers, of course, this is building your API and being able to display this content on different front ends, because the more platforms, the better. mobile devices, web applications, wearable devices, other APIs. That's great. That's scaling. And then for your content team, that's creating content models that would quicken the content creation process because you can reuse those anywhere. So you create the content model once, and then you can scale your ability to create content using them, because all you have to do is put in details and fill in the content rather than have to go through the process of creating more content models. Great. So this leads me to tip number 2. Optimize for efficiency. Cater for your whole team, be that developers, marketers, content managers, or content architects. You want them to be effective because then that helps you make your content scale. Great. And that's it with the second tip. We've planned our voyage. We've empowered our crew, and now we should think about how to be more resourceful at sea. And really, what being more resourceful is looking at how do we get the most out of what we have. And it's a very interesting question because headless at its core promotes extensibility. You have the ability to extend your reach and scale your content from just one platform, having a single source. I think the diagram I shared earlier was a really good picture of what headless enables. So in doing this, in trying to be resourceful, what we're doing really is capturing business value beyond just the content we have, and also extending our functionality, extending the functionality of your headless CMS. And there's a few things that really help in solving both these things. And I'll go through each of them briefly. And to achieve these two things, what we're looking at really is doing a couple of small things. And I'll get to these. So these are customizability. We need to be able to customize our CMS, be it its API and how we can call this API and what happens when we do certain API calls. We have this really cool thing with Strapi where we have lifecycle hooks, and we can abstract certain business logic into those lifecycle hooks so that whenever content changes or whenever content is created or whenever content is updated, certain things can happen. We can tweak that content before it actually gets added to your CMS, or you can append data or a message to that, or you can actually make calls in between that process. And just having the ability to do something like this can really drive some creative solutions to amazing problems people are having. The second one is support for third-party services. Would be lying if in today's world we said all we need is what we've got and nothing else. Third-party services are things like an image hosting provider like Cloudinary, or an email service like Sendbird, or even just something like S3, Amazon S3. You should be able to support third-party services because then these can extend our efforts to scale our content, and then can also really just make for a better experience and a richer application, which of course helps solve many problems. And something that is really important today is being able to handle authentication. Not something everyone looks to a CMS to do, but I mean, if your CMS can handle that, that takes away the need for a third-party service. And that's a whole other microservice that we won't need to build, ship, and deploy, right? And if your CMS can do that, that's great. We also want a really rich plugin ecosystem, because again, looking at being able to extend our efforts and extend what our CMS can do. Maybe you want to publish content to other platforms when you publish it to your CMS, and things like plugins can do that. Maybe you want to add a different technology to your CMS and extend its use. plugins help achieve that. And having a really rich plugin ecosystem is powerful because it drives so many different solutions. And again, we're looking at really extending what we already have. Yeah. And the last one really is sort of a reach and sort of encompasses all these things. It's, going for an open source solution. And like I mentioned, it's a bit of a reach because not every CMS out there is open source, but it would be nice if somewhere, and if you would pick yours, you should probably go with an open source one because then it would make a lot of these other things much easier. You'd be much more equipped to customize it. Plugins would be much, much easier to create, handle, and keep track of. Things like authentication, you'd be, I guess, a lot more confident knowing how authentication happens. And really, these are just ways of extending your CMS. And I've teased the next tip quite a bit. You've probably got it already. The next tip is extending your CMS. And to be honest, this is really all I have for you in terms of setting sail. After planning your voyage and getting your crew on board and extending and being resourceful, you're pretty much set, and you should have a really good trip on the sea of CMSs, in the sea of CMSs rather. And I really like to summarize things, so I'll do just that. We'll go through what we've gone through. Nope, that doesn't sound right. I really like to summarize things. So we'll go through all the tips I've given. Tip 1 was go headless. This is really great because it takes you and gives you the ability to scale and extend and maintain your content much easier. And then tip number 2 was optimizing for efficiency. That's making sure our teams, our content teams, our developer teams are efficient, because that way we can create content much easier and we can let it scale much easier. And tip number 3 is extending your CMS, getting more value out of what you already have. So looking at things like plugins and customizing our CMS. And yeah, that's not it. I think it's worth mentioning that everything at the core that I've talked about is how Strapi is built. And there aren't many open source headless CMSs. So I think it was a bit cheeky for me to mention that in extending, you should think about your CMS being open source, but you really should, to be honest. And I'll tell you a bit about Strapi. I've already covered what a headless CMS is, but besides Strapi being headless at its core, there's a couple few interesting. And besides Strapi being headless at its core, there's a couple interesting things that are worth mentioning. It's open source, completely open source under an MIT license. So you can tweak its code, you can customize it and make your heart happy. I've already talked about the ability to customize it with things like lifecycle hooks and editing, or making your own administration panel, which really just builds on the open source nature of it. It is self-hosted. So at the core, we believe in letting you be your owners of your own data, keeping, of course, your privacy, having data security and data ownership. A self-hosted CMS gives that to you. It's 100% JavaScript, which is also really interesting, seeing as a lot of the websites being built today, a lot of the front ends being built today are JavaScript. So having your developers work with a CMS and a front end that are both JavaScript is really good for your organization, and that's always nice to have. We have a plugin system, which means you can build over the CMS and add certain snippets of functionality and extend and just do the craziest, funniest things. And of course, with business value in mind. And speaking of the plugin system, we have GraphQL support. So we have a GraphQL plugin, and out of the box, Strapi comes with a REST API, and we have a GraphQL plugin to extend and enable GraphQL support for Strapi. So you can make GraphQL calls from Strapi. And if you are interested in trying out Strapi, I have a link here to bring up a DigitalOcean droplet where you can test out Strapi for free and get some credits also. So bit.ly/Strapi droplet, and that'll take you to a nice Strapi droplet, and you can get started with creating content and hopefully scaling it. So that is all from me. All I have to say is bon voyage, all the best on your journey. And I can leave now saying, I know you're equipped to set sail in the sea of CMSs. If you'd like resources on Strapi, all things Strapi, you should go to strapi.io/getting started. And yeah, you can sink in deeper from there. And that is all from me. Thank you very much and smooth sailing.